I think it's always really surprising when first of all, when you talk about attending a church in a Muslim country. I think that sometimes surprises people. But I think it also almost shocks people when you tell them that your faith grew tremendously while you were living in a Muslim country. So for me, my time here, I think it's just been really encouraging. It's been great to be here in the UAE. It's been a real blessing to be able to worship freely here, but to be part of a healthy church within that context, I think is just really, really special.
As a working professional, as an educator in Abu Dhabi, it's truly a blessing for me to have the freedom to go to church and be able to gather with believers. And I'm really thankful and praise God that He has given this much wisdom to the ruler of the UAE to allow us to gather on the Lord's Day as a church and as God's people.
In my job today, working as the Director of Operations with the Evangelical Church, I interact with the UAE government every single day, and I'm just blown away by the tolerance of this country, and I guess the desire to understand other faiths. I spend a lot of time in my job telling my Muslim friends that work with UAE government, what are evangelicals and what do we believe and why do we do this and why do we do that, and just helping them understand. And that's really not what I expected at all when I moved to the Middle East. And so it's a pretty amazing place. It's a pretty unique place where the government, though it is an Islamic government, cares deeply about Christians being able to live as Christians shall live.
UAE is a very tolerant country, especially towards us Christians. They allow us to worship openly, and as years went by, we've seen a greater interaction between ECC and the governing authorities here, and it was all positive. And the governing authorities is not trying to interfere in the church in terms of what we teach, in terms of our doctrine. They're not trying to dictate how to run a church, but they would like to see ECC and other churches, for that matter, as part of the UAE community.
Personally, one of the most interesting features for me about ECC is the fact that the history of ECC is uniquely interlinked with the history of UAE, and I would say the church is a true testament to the generosity and benevolence of the rulers of this land. So when I look at what ECC has achieved all these years, it's been a true community of love and grace to the community around. So my hope and prayer for the next, for the future, for the next 40, 50, whatever that number is that we would continue to be a faithful community of believers, that we would reach out to people around us, again, regardless of nationality, race, or language, which again is a true testament to the tolerance and the focus that this nation has for its people.
The history of evangelical Christianity in the UAE is closely tied to and bound up with the history of the nation itself.
The history of the church goes back to 1960, and not in Abu Dhabi, but with the work of the Lord in Al Ain, the interior city. The ruler of that time had, on one of his visits overseas, had witnessed a Christian hospital, a mission hospital. And this was in the days before oil, before money, before there was any kind of really modern medical care in the country. And he had a heart to see such a hospital established for his people in Al-Ain, his home city. And the word went out on the mission circles to invite that he was open to having a mission hospital in Al-Ain. And TEAM, the Evangelical Alliance Mission, had a couple, Dr. Pat and Marion Kennedy, both of them doctors, and they both knew Arabic. They were in Jordan at the time, and they accepted the challenge to come and start this hospital, particularly focused on maternity hospital. And so they came in and just revolutionized that. Started with Barasti thatch shelter under a tree, basically, and built a very simple hospital and offered modern medical care. And many of the royal family were born in that hospital. Sheikh Zayed, who became the founder of the country, his children were born there. Sheikh Mohammed, who's now the president, was born in that hospital. And through the process won a huge amount of goodwill with the rulers of the country. And from the very beginning, they made it clear that they would be having worship and Bible study and so on. And this was accepted.
In 1972, a group of believers from the same group who started the Oasis Hospital moved to Abu Dhabi, specifically Carl and Barbara Scherbeck, their family, and that was the beginnings of the Evangelical Community Church of Abu Dhabi.
The country has this relationship dating back to the early 1960s when they came, where local Emiratis really appreciate evangelicals and the way that they've cared for this country long before the money and the oil was a thing here. And I think that you see that even to this day. I think you see that in the land that was given to us by Sheikh Khalifa. I think you see that in the way that we're allowed to operate and worship freely here in the building that they let us use. I think that there's a great appreciation from Emiratis for evangelicals and how evangelicals have served this country and its history.
And so, one of the sayings I heard in the UAE was that the evangelical Christians loved us before we had oil. And so there was a care for them as a people. So that kind of connection and openness, it existed long before I was there. Sheikh Zayed, the founder of the modern nation, was a man of remarkable vision. And a very open-minded, open-hearted man who really welcomed other nations in. And one of the remarkable components of my time in Abu Dhabi is that it happened to coincide with a season in the nation's development where they were pressing forward with greater religious tolerance and religious acceptance. They were putting that on the front burner of their mission as a nation. So some of the things that happened while we were there is they established a cabinet-level position in the government called the Ministry of Tolerance. And its job was to promote the welfare and understanding among the different religious communities in the country. For instance, I was invited to go as part of a delegation to an event that the State Department in the United States put on by Mike Pompeo. And it was a ministerial for religious freedom, for advancing religious freedom. So I went with several of the leaders from the country. I went with the head of the Grand Mosque, and he and I became fast friends as a result of that. And we traveled as a delegation from the UAE. I find myself in a delegation from the UAE to my home country in the USA as a representative of the kind of religious tolerance and freedom that they were pursuing in the United Arab Emirates. So it was a great honor on both sides, and I think is a picture of what a proactive leader the UAE is trying to be, especially in its region, in the area of religious tolerance and freedom of worship. We've seen over the years how the UAE has sought to engage people from different faiths, to engage the evangelicals here, We saw this with the Ministry of Tolerance and their efforts to promote religious tolerance in this land. And then we've seen this with the formation of the Department of Community Development, which was formed in 2019, giving us really as a place of worship for evangelical Christians and other places of worship in Abu Dhabi, legal recognition and a legal standing which enables us to walk into different government offices or different things and be recognized as an official entity in this country. And when we received the license, our first license from the Department of Community Development, it was a great moment of celebration for us as the evangelical church to see the way that this nation continues to progress and really to set the standard for religious tolerance and freedom of worship in this region at large.
The government is always kind of watching out over our church and making sure we're safe. They're concerned about our security and they want to support that. So there's a long history of that kind of tolerance. And I'm using tolerance more in the classical sense of loving and accepting someone else even though you may disagree with their viewpoint. So living in civil society in harmony together, even though we may have diametrically different understandings of things religiously, politically, philosophically. Or you might say, a Christian word would be something like grace. It's showing mercy and kindness to another. So that's the kind of culture that they're proactively seeking to continue and develop and amplify on, not only for themselves, but for the next generation of the people that grow up, and also as an example and a model to the broader region. That they're trying to make the UAE a model to follow when it comes to how to function together in a complex society with lots of religions and lots of nationalities.
And when I think of all of the displays of God's faithfulness here in the Middle East and across the UAE in particular, allowing churches to exist since the 1970s, like ECC has been, that have been a part of so many changes that this country has made. From the time there was nothing but just pure sand till today with this modern mega beautiful nation that we live in. ECC has been a part of that. And God has shown that He is doing something unique. It's so hard to be able to quantify it, to talk about what it actually means, because what it means is people's lives. 50 years of investing in people from all around the world.
When I think of UAE, I feel like we live in a bit of a bubble in the Middle East. It's a very safe place, it's a very tolerant place, and it's a place where Christians are free to worship, God. I pray, and my hope is that ECC takes advantage of that we are a light within not just Abu Dhabi, not just the UAE, but all of the Middle East. And I think that the government gives us the opportunity to be that light. I think that they allow us to function freely where we can demonstrate God's love to those around us. I think that this entire region can be impacted by the fact that the government's tolerance allows for a church to function as a church biblically should.
One of the greatest blessings, and indeed a privilege, that we as evangelical Christians have been able to enjoy in this nation for 50 years now, half a century, is the freedom that we've been given to worship, freedom of worship. For 50 years, we have been able to gather as the church week after week to hear the Bible being taught, to sing songs of worship to our God, to seek His face in prayer, and to celebrate Holy Communion and baptism This is a unique privilege in this nation. And for many of our believers who come from all over the world, really, from almost every country in the world, we are granted this great joy of having our church as a place of refreshment, a place of encouragement, a place where all of these Christians are equipped to live out their Christian faith faithfully and to go about their daily lives with the encouragement that they can come and seek God together as a people in this place.